Hi everyone, and welcome to our first part of anatomy, where we're going to look at the introduction of anatomical terms. And so let's begin by talking about what the definition of anatomy is. So this is going to be the study of structure. And so this goes way back, a long time in history, very interesting because obviously we're humans, we want to know all about ourselves. And so the Greeks had defined the word of anatomy to be of cutting up or of opening up. And so we have to understand, though, the importance of structure so that later we can apply it for the physiology, which is the study of function. So by looking at cells individually, looking at organs and tissues, then we can apply that anatomical knowledge and use that for application to physiology in terms of what does it do for the body. All right, the two main types of anatomy that we will pay attention to is microscopic anatomy and gross anatomy. So microscopic, this is what we can't see with our naked eye, and so we'll have to use microscopes in lab to help with this so that we can see all the different cells of the body and then also some different tissues as well. Gross anatomy is the things that we can see in our body. So when we look at our skin, when we look at our hair, when we look at our eyes, these are things that we don't need microscopes for, and we can study them in terms of not having microscopes. So two main areas that will focus in on looking at that gross anatomy, which again are going to be the body parts that are visible to the naked eye, include surface anatomy. So this is very important for those of you that are going into healthcare because you're going to use the surface features to identify and locate different body processes at joints, and then also to obtain like pulse pressure and blood samples from a patient. So having an idea of where body regions are very critical for your professional advancement. And then also we'll look at systemic anatomy, and so this is looking at each of the body systems where we have 11 of them. And so for example, we'll study the digestive system, and this will include looking at the stomach, the esophagus, the mouth, the intestines, and then also another example will be reproductive, where we'll look at male and female reproductive systems and how those organs, tissues, and cells work together to make up that entire system. Well, in order for us to understand the macroscopic anatomy, we do have to understand how the body is structurally organized, going from smallest to largest. So we start with atoms. So these are going to be at the chemical level, and this is the simplest level. And so the atoms are going to be the smallest units of matter that make us up. Then going a little bit larger are going to be molecules, where we have two or more atoms that are going to combine to form molecules. So examples would be like sugar, water, vitamins, amino acids, lipids. These would be example. And then more complex molecules will make up macromolecules. So this is where we heard of DNA, the deoxyribonucleic acid, RNA, also talk about proteins. And so when we have macromolecules, then these are going to form organelles. And so these are going to be the microscopic structures that are found within cells. So then within the cells, what we'll have is the smallest living structure, and these are going to serve as the basic units of structure and function in an organism. So cells and their components are going to be formed from atoms and molecules at the chemical level. And while we look at different cells, we typically have like one picture of the perfect eukaryotic cell. Well, that's not going to be the case for all of our different organs. And so we have to keep that in mind when we look at different organs. It's going to have different types of cells that help to make that up. And so a skeletal muscle cell is going to be very different than, say, from a bone cell. So then we go on from cells, then we go on to tissues. And so when we have groups of similar cells, they're going to have a common function that form at the next stage. And so tissues are going to be precise organizations of similar cells that are going to have a specialized function. And so we have 4 different types of tissues, and we'll cover this later too. We have epithelial tissue, which helps to cover exposed surfaces and helps to line body cavities. Then we have connective tissue, so this is like bones and cartilage, very important for protection and support. And then also we have muscle tissue, which is important for movement. And then finally nervous tissue, tissue, which helps to have communication between the rest of our body. So then once we go from tissues, then we go on to organ at the organ level. So organs are going to be 2 or more tissue types that are going to work together to have a specific function. So for example, the small intestine is going to have different structural and organizational relationships that work together to absorb digestive nutrients that we have in food and in our drinks. Okay. All right, then we go on to the organ system level. And so this is where we have groups of organs that work together to make up a system. So for example, digestive system, this will have the stomach, the mouth, the throat, the esophagus, the large and small intestine. We'll have the appendix and the colon and rectum, and then finally the anus. So all that is going to be one continuous tube actually, and that's going to aid in digestion, which the function is to absorb materials from food and from drink. And then lastly, what we have is the organism. And so this is where we have all those 11 organ systems that are going to work together and function and provide us as humans into an organism. And so finally, what does it mean for us to be living human beings? Well, we have to have these certain characteristics. And so there are 7 of them. So first one is organization. This has to do with the anatomy. So we have to look at how structures are going to work together and then to make different functions when we have similar cells working together. Then we look at metabolisms. And so this is having different chemical reactions that are occurring in the body to help break down food and then to build up proteins and different carbohydrates that are needed for the body. And so we'll have periods in our time, such as with growth, like when we're young and going through puberty, and then later on females will go through this again when they're pregnant, and to help increase with metabolism to help build things up in the body. Also, we'll have growth and development, and so this is very important. This goes in with the last part of metabolism, where when we're also injured too, we'll have an increase in metabolism because we're trying to heal and trying to fix the body. Then we'll look at responsiveness. So this is where all the organisms respond to change, and so we're very adaptable to where we are. So we can acclimatize to different altitudes, so different temperatures as well. And then what we have is different adaptations, and so this has to do with our cells being able to change based on our environment. So our anatomy is helping to aid in our physiology, our function of the body. Then we'll have regulation, and so this is important for homeostasis, which is going to keep an internal environment that's going to be very or fit within a very narrow range, but it is going to be a very dynamic process. So for example, maintaining similar body temperature. And then lastly, for us to continue on our generations and to be here on Earth, we go through reproduction, and so organisms make new cells for growth, maintenance, and repair.